Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Today, I have some new toys to play with. It feels like forever since I've had anything new, something that isn't an expansion to a game I already have or miniatures for a game I already have, but this is something completely new. This is Godtear. As you can see, I have purchased the 2 starter sets that are available for this game. Technically, you can start playing with just one, but I bought both because, really, I feel like you need to. And really, I feel like they intended you to buy both, and they really probably should have included all of the contents of these 2 boxes in one single starter set. But we will talk about that in more detail a little bit later on. What I'm going to do is, today I'm going to look at the first of the 2 starter sets. I'm going to look at Eternal Glade because it's my favourite of the 2. We're going to have a quick unboxing. We're going to look at what is in the box. I'm going to talk a little bit about the game. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I like and do not like about the way that they have packaged this game for retail. And then in a follow-up video, we'll look at the second starter set, the Borderlands. So this is Godtear, a 2-player hex-based miniature skirmish game from Steamforged Games. Steamforged Games being the company that brought us the Dark Souls board game and the Resident Evil 2 board game. However, unlike bringing us a board game based on a popular video game franchise, this time they have brought something which I believe is their own IP, the realm of Godtear. And before we talk about exactly what that is, I just want to mention the graphic design on these boxes. The artwork is absolutely lovely. But I've got to say, the first time I saw this game, I just saw the cover of the box, and I wasn't instantly able to grok what the name of the game actually was. The A in Godtear is the Godtear emblem, which made it a little bit difficult to determine it was actually an A immediately when I was looking at a small picture on a screen. Maybe that was just me, maybe it was a low coffee morning. But also, I couldn't decipher whether it was Godtear or Godtear. Until you know a little bit more about the setting of the game, it's not something that's immediately apparent. I would not have gone for this name particularly. But the artwork, the graphic design is lovely, and when you see the 2 starter sets stacked together, they really nice colour contrast and everything just looks really nice. So what is a Godtear? Basically, the setting of this game is that people forgot the gods. They stopped worshipping the gods, and the gods were weakened, and eventually they shattered into a million pieces, and then these pieces rained down on Earth, causing cataclysms and blowing up large areas of the world. But these Godtears, as they are called, are like condensed power of the gods. So people immediately started to try and claim these magical elements to gain power, to gain strength. And the concept of the game is that there are various warbands fighting to claim these Godtears and to harness their power. It's a pretty cool concept. There's not a huge amount of fluff about the game. There's not a huge amount of fluff about the history of the world, but it's pretty interesting. It's got a lot of standard tropes in it. It's got goblins and orcs and elves, but it's doing its own thing a little bit, and the central concept of the Godtears is a good one. It was certainly enough to grab my attention. This is a game that was on Kickstarter originally. Anybody who knows me, follows my channel, will know that I do not back things on Kickstarter. However, I noted the game, and when the game went to retail, I kept an eye on it. But it was quite expensive. I think the retail price for each starter set is £40 in the UK. And I do feel that you need both of them. But I was able to find the starter sets for £29 each, which was a much more manageable sum, really, because we're looking at less than £60 for the 2 starter sets. Still a lot, still I think potentially more than it should have been for what you're getting, but certainly better than paying £80. And it is worth noting that the contents of the starter sets are very similar. There are some cosmetic differences, obviously the artwork is different, but really the only real difference is you get 2 factions in this set, and then you get 2 different factions in the other set. The first thing you are greeted with when you open the box is the game board, and it is beautifully illustrated. You can see it's got this really attractive meadow type area, which gradually sort of fades into an area that looks a little bit frosty and dying. Vibrant colours, really nice. Furthermore, the board is double-sided, which it didn't need to be, because as far as I can tell, the board is entirely cosmetic. I haven't actually had a chance to play yet, but there does not appear to be any sort of rules for elevation, terrain, difficult terrain, anything like that. It is a much more abstract chess-like experience than a more traditional miniature skirmish game might be. The only real terrain you're going to have on the board are the objective hexes, which mark where the Godtears have landed. Still, it's nice to have two different pieces of artwork, one on each side of the board. It's slightly less good when you realise that in the second starter set, which we'll be looking at in another video, there is a unique piece of artwork on one side of the board, which is themed around that particular starter set, but the reverse is the same barren wasteland that is on the reverse of this board. And in case you were interested, here is our barren wasteland, which appears in both starter sets. Of course, you get a rulebook. The rulebook has themed artwork for the starter set, and all of the examples throughout the rulebook use examples specific to the two factions from this set, which is a nice touch. It wasn't necessary to do that, but everything is themed to include these two characters. And at the back of the rulebook, we have 6 different scenarios to play through, and we have our reference on the back. And this is a very simple game. It's a game that manages to condense all of its rules into a single page of references, and that's really all you need to play. It's the kind of game that I would say Games Workshop might design. I always say that Games Workshop make very streamlined games that aren't necessarily elegant, but they're muscular, they're compact. They do it with as few rules as possible so you can focus on the theme and the immersion and the storytelling. And I get that vibe with this. You get 10 dice. These are custom dice. They have a single success on them, they have 2 successes on them, and they have blanks. That's all you need for this game. Everything is done based on rolling dice and comparing to target numbers. Next up, you get 3 thick punch boards with all of your game tokens on. And I say all of them, but there's not actually that many. We've got a couple of wound tokens on each sheet. We've got our Godtear hexes, which mark the objectives on the battlefield, and then we have these boon tokens, and on the reverse of the boon tokens we have I think they're called bane tokens, but they're the reverse. So if this side gives you +1 shield, the reverse gives you -1 shield. Besides that, you get these round trackers, which mark the ebb and flow of the gameplay, and on the reverse they have the number of victory points that you win for the round. It is interesting to note that on the token sheets there are 4 faction tokens, and this faction token and this faction token are for the factions that you get in this starter set, while this faction token and this faction token are for the other starter set, because obviously what they thought was the best way and the cheapest and most cost-effective way to produce these token sheets would be to create a set of 3 token sheets and put exactly the same set of 3 in each of the starter sets. So you get a couple of tokens that are not actually relevant to your particular faction. You get 3 of these dashboards, and you will need one of these dashboards for each faction under your control. 3 is an interesting number because obviously there are not 3 factions in this starter set, but we will talk about that more when I talk about how they have put together this game for retail. Next up, you get 6 cards, and 6 cards is all you need. That's 3 for each faction. There are 2 for your champion and then 1 for your minions, because each faction comprises a single oversized champion character and then a group of minions. The cards go on your dashboard during play and help you keep track of what's going on. On the left you have your unit card for your champion, and above it you have a space for placing the buffs and debuffs that the champion may acquire. And the cards are double-sided because this game has a quite unique play style, which I'm not sure I've seen it anywhere before or anything quite like it. But you have a plot phase and a clash phase. And in the plot phase, the structure of the rounds is that one player will move all of their champions and units, and then the other player will move all of their champions and units. And you use this side of the cards, which has the plot phase side on it. After both sides have moved, you flip the cards over, and on the back of the cards you have completely different skills that are more combat oriented. And you go into the clash phase, where it becomes an I go you go structure, where one player will move either a champion or a unit, then the opponent will move either a champion or a unit, and then it will continue back and forth. So you have a first phase in the game where your skills are mainly related to movement and placing banners on objectives to score points. And then you have a second phase, which is more of a tug-of-war combat structure. So this card is for your champion. The card on the other side is for your minions. This card in the middle, it has reminders of all of your champion's other always-on special abilities and lists an ultimate ability. When you use the ultimate ability, which is a one-time use ability, you flip this card over, so it continues to stay on your dashboard as a reference, but you can see that your ultimate ability is no longer available. It's a very clean, neat, efficient way of keeping track of your units, your champions, your abilities, your tokens affecting your champion, your tokens affecting your unit, your health for your champion, all in one place. Very neat. I think this is very good design. And that's it in terms of accessories and additional items for playing the game. The only other contents in these starter sets are the miniatures themselves, the two factions. You get lovely miniatures to represent those factions, and we're going to start by taking a look at Nia and her little quartzlings, because they're my favourites. Now, whenever I buy a game that has miniatures in it, I am always thinking about how I can use those miniatures in other games, like Rangers of Shadowdeep or Dungeons & Dragons, but I have to say that the miniatures for Godtear are probably the least useful that I have at the moment because of the scaling of them. Each team has a faction leader, a champion, and it is always an oversized character. Here we have Nia, and I think she's supposed to be a gnome, and there are also dwarves and goblins, but in all cases, the champion is massive. There is an in-universe explanation for this. It is supposed to be the case that as they absorb the power of the god tiers, they gain in strength, but they also gain in size. But I think it might have been mainly just to make it so that the champion miniatures were larger on the table, to give them more of a table presence and to make it easier to pick them out of the battlefield at a glance. For me though, it's an aesthetic that I don't like that much, because I've always thought that when you're mixing different sizes of the same type of thing, it looks like you've just got your scaling off. For example, if you've got a unit of elves, and then standing next to them is a champion elf who looks exactly like them except massive, it just looks a little bit off to me. It looks like the scaling's gone wrong, even though there is an in-universe explanation. This is just a personal opinion of mine. It was an issue that I had with some of the Anima Tactics miniatures, because certain miniatures from that range were supposed to be really big characters, but it just looked like they'd scaled the miniatures slightly wrong and they looked a little bit off. But regardless, you get your big miniature to lead your force. The miniatures themselves are very nice. You can see they are all pre-assembled, factory assembled, and the assembly is not too bad. You can see a few little gaps. Not too bad in terms of mold lines. Detailing is sometimes a little bit soft on some of the engraved plate armor and things like that. And although we are in a firmer plastic than the rubbery type that you might get in something like a Dungeons and Dragons board game, you will still get a few bent weapons that you will need to do the hot water treatment on, and the hot water treatment will work just fine to straighten out any of those bent elements. On the bottom we have the Steamforged Game logo, which I think they emboss on all of their miniatures. Overall, very nice. And you will see that Nia is in a fetching green. This is actually because the colours represent the type of champion that they are. we can see in the rules that each type of champion has a different way of scoring points, because this is a game that is all about points. It's not a game where you can table your opponents. It's not a game where you can wipe out their forces, because the champions will never die. They can be knocked down, but they will never die. They can always get back up. Minions can die, but there is a recruit action that allows you to bring them back to the table. So it's not about killing everything on the board, it's about scoring points. And each type of champion has a unique way of doing that. Shapers can manipulate objective hexes to find a foothold for their banner, and they gain a bonus step when they make a claim action. So Nia is a shaper, and there are other expansion packs for this game which introduce other factions, and there are other green factions available. And then you get your minions, who are supposed to be regular size. They are not characters that can absorb god tiers. They can't even stand on god tiers during the game, because to do so they would just be ripped apart by the power. Nia gets 3 of these cute little quartzlings characters. They're little dumpy things. They're like humanoid creatures created out of crystals and rocks. And what I like is that each one is a unique design. Each faction also gets a banner. During the game, you will place your banner onto god tiers. You will score victory point for placing the banner, and if the banner is still there at the end of the turn, you will score additional victory points. In this case, Nia's got this crystal rock formation. Being rock monsters, these quartzlings do scale quite nicely with other miniatures from my collection. For example, this wizard from Castle Ravenloft. This is a wizard from the Nolzur's range. This is one of the Reaper miniatures metal wizards. But of course, Nia herself is basically a giant. The second faction in the starter is led by Morrigan, who is an awesome, super huge, undead, demonic character. This faction is undead and has a frosty, icy theme to it. You're very much getting a Game of Thrones type vibe with this faction. This is a really nice miniature. This is the kind of miniature that I don't mind being oversized, because it looks like a huge demonic entity anyway. If this was just a human, I would just think that just looks like a big human. But this type of character looks great in the big size. And it's a really, really nice miniature. We've got a little bit of bending on the staff here, but again, hot water will remedy that. Again, each unit is an individual sculpt. There are no two the same. And you will notice that they are in this fetching red colour, and that is because Morrigan is a slayer. This particular faction focuses on killing enemy champions and will gain bonus victory points every time that an enemy champion is knocked down. And Morrigan's banner is a shard of ice imbued with magic, with skulls. Something suitably creepy. If you're interested in the scaling, you can see that they scale up very nicely with the Castle Ravenloft skeletons, but the Castle Ravenloft skeletons are oversized anyway, because the Dungeons & Dragons miniature line doesn't really care that much about scaling. Some of the scaling is a bit wacky. Compared to our Reaper wizard, you can see the skeleton is a little bit large. But I think these are the most useful in terms of miniatures that I can use in other games. The undead and the quartzlings will almost certainly get used in other things like Rangers of Shadowdeep. So that's the full contents of this particular starter set. And to give my thoughts on what I like and don't like, it's important to kind of understand how this game works in terms of its structure. Rather than building an army that is entirely one faction, you build armies that comprise several different types of champion that will temporarily form an alliance and work together. So what they've done with these starter sets is they've created them as a way to test the game as a two-player experience, but also make it so that it's a good entry point for someone who wants a starting force and they're going to go to game clubs or whatever and play against other people who have their own starter sets. Because you can play this game with one champion on each side, which is obviously how you would have to play if you only had one starter set. You can play where each player has 2 champions. You can play where each player has 3 champions, and 3 champions is the standard recommended game size. It's also possible to play 4 champions aside. So I can see what they've done with the starter sets. They've created them in such a way that you can pick up one of these and you can immediately get a friend, open the box and play a game of Godtear. But it's going to be a very cut down version of the game. You will have enough components in the box to play a one-on-one, but that's not going to be particularly exciting. As you can see, each faction is only 1 champion and 1 unit. You're going to very quickly see everything that those 2 factions have to offer, and because you've got no other champions on your team, you've got no other units on your team, you've got no opportunity to create synergies. This is why I feel it is pretty much essential to buy both starter sets, especially if, like me, you're the kind of person who has to buy the games and then introduce them to other people, perhaps play them with family members who don't have their own sets. If you know somebody else who already has a starter set for Godtear, you can potentially buy 1 starter set and then you've got enough to go and play the game with that friend. If you've got people who come over to your house or whatever and you have to provide the games, you're really going to want both starter sets, because once you have another 2 factions, you can immediately play a 2-on-2 game, but you can also mix those factions up. You can have Morrigan play with Nia against Finvar from the other expansion, or you can bring Finvar over and play with Morrigan against Nia and Titus, who is the other character in the other starter set. You immediately have a lot more options. Furthermore, the other 2 heroes in the other starter set cover the other 2 types of champions that are available. Titus is a yellow champion who is a Maelstrom champion, and I will talk about those in the other video, and Finvar is a blue Guardian champion. So if you only have one of the boxes, you only have half of the types of champion that are available, so you're only seeing half of the types of gameplay that the game has to offer. Even if you have 2 starter sets, you still don't have enough factions at your disposal to play the full recommended 3-on-3 game. You're still going to need to buy another 2 faction units. They've included 3 dashboards in each starter set, so they obviously intend for you to play at that scale, but that's not possible with just the starter sets. And to the best of my knowledge, the factions in the starter sets are not available individually anyway, so if you want to play as Titus or Finvar or Morrigan or Nia, you have to buy the relevant starter set anyway. So really, I feel like you've been put into a position where you really do need to buy both. If you just play with the one starter set, you're not going to have the best initial experience with the game. I mean, you're going to play a learning scenario, and then you're very quickly going to feel that you don't have any options. You can't build an army. You can't do that interesting stuff that skirmish games allow. Half the fun of a skirmish game is building your force, figuring out how your characters are going to work together, what your plans are going to be, coming up with those strategies. You can't do that. So the starter sets are good in as much as they serve as a way to get you into the game, to get you to learn the game, which is like, I guess, most starter sets. But I feel that perhaps they should have combined the 2 starter sets into one core box. For a start, they could have removed some of the Godtear objectives and things, and they could have used one single game board and put a different piece of artwork on each side, one for the characters represented in the Borderlands box set and one side for the characters represented in the Eternal Glade starter set, and they could have done away with that generic wasteland battlefield completely. They would have had one less board to print and one less piece of artwork to create. And then I think they probably could have got the starter set down to perhaps a more reasonable price. Of course, you're also you don't have to worry about shelf space for 2 different starter sets. You don't have to worry about packaging for 2 different starter sets. You don't have to worry about printing 2 different rulebooks with different artwork in each. You're saving money in a lot of different ways, and perhaps could roll those savings into a slightly more cost-effective introduction to the game. Like I said, I paid £58 for the 2 sets combined, which isn't bad. It's not the worst, especially as every miniature is unique. That is something that I really do appreciate. But I just feel like it could have been a slightly more cost-effective single box set that would have given you those army building opportunities right out of the box, even if you don't have another player who already had a starter set of their own. And of course, it would have given you access to all 4 types of champion. I think overall, I'm just not a big fan of starter set formats that are sold in a way as to say, oh, it's for one player to get started, but you can use it as a 2-player starter just to learn. I would much rather have a slightly more comprehensive single box introduction to a gaming system. I can understand not including 6 factions, even though that is the standard game size. I think the box set for that would be far too expensive and it'd be far too much to present at one time, and you would also be limiting the options for creating armies right out of the box. Letting people go and pick their own factions to add in is going to be a big draw. Even though I haven't played the game yet, I've looked at other factions and thought, which ones do I like the look of? If I like this game, which ones would I consider getting? But this is just a personal opinion from me, and I don't want to sound like I'm really down on this. I don't necessarily agree with the way that they've done the 2 starter sets, but I managed to get them for a reasonable price, and I'm very happy with the actual quality of the contents. And looking at the game itself, the game looks like it's going to be good fun. I like the fact that it's entirely going for objective-based victory point scoring. It's not about tabling your opponent. I like the concept of a plotting phase and then an action phase. There's a really interesting scoring system where as you score victory points, you pull a turn token towards you. And then when your opponent scores victory points, it pulls it back towards them. And at the end of the round, if the token is closer to you, you score the round and win the victory points for that round. That's a really interesting concept. I'm going to do another video, I'm sure, down the line where I do a full explanation of the rules. But I think there's a lot to like here. It looks good. It looks really nice. It's got a good, strong table presence. I'm not enamored with the oversized champion figures, but I get why they've done that. And I guess that's all I have to say for now. In a follow-up video, I'm going to unbox the other starter set, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about scaling of the miniatures in that set, because I think it's more of an issue in that set than it is in this set. But yeah, we will do that another day, because I feel I have talked for far too long already. I hope you have enjoyed this look at this game and my initial reactions, my initial thoughts. There will be much more to come, I am sure. Thank you so much for watching. If you have liked the video, please consider pressing that like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.